Hello everyone. I'd intended to do a few more brainy type videos, like how we can perhaps define taste in music or why most of us get stuck in one music period or genre, but I also had a few simpler ideas to discuss. I always want to start with disclaimers, and the first one is that I'm not a music nerd. This means that while I'm familiar with a fairly broad range of music, I'm not an expert on the other stuff. I'm not really interested in what Jimmy Page said about Richie Blackmore, and so on. Artists are also people, they're not perfect, and honestly, I don't find that part interesting, but I'm willing to give their music a listen. The second disclaimer is that I consider myself as the least interesting topic in my videos. But because of copyright restrictions, I can't play the actual songs. So if I have to feature a song, I have to play them myself, and in doing so, I have to unfortunately show my face. Next, it's kinda random how we as a society and as an individual come across music, so the chronologies are all jumbled up. Before the internet, we were dependent on actual human beings carrying albums from other countries, or snippets of songs from movies and other media. But even with the internet around, we have fairly random directions to discovering music. As an example, yes, Mr. Jimi Hendrix was available to me since the 70s, but it was only in 2017 that I really got into him, at the same time when I got back to playing the guitar. More on this in another video. Next, let's not argue on the genres. I use the term very loosely here. They are used to describe a general style, so let's not go into discussions if a band was ska or rocksteady, or if a band was rockabilly or rock and roll. Anywho, moving on. I think many of us, if not all, know what the term gateway means. A gateway is an opening to something more extreme, something more unusual, something more radical or dangerous, or to just some more music. What I will show here are my gateways in music that led me to more music. That is about that one album or artist that tuned me in to a wider world of music. I will stick to the more intense experiences here, where the rabbit hole went really deep. Ironically, the earlier gateways were a lot clearer to me. The more recent ones are a lot hazier. In the 70s, there is no question to what started it all. This one. This is my first gateway in my early teenage years in the late 70s. This album and this band brought me to 70s rock, such as Queen, Deep Purple, ZZ Top, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Foreigner, Foghat, and everything else. This album made me decide that I wanted to be a rocker, meaningless as that word is these days. This first gateway also inspired me to learn the guitar. Yes, I know how to play the song that is banned in music stores. And this is the beginning of the realization that, just like everyone else, I liked some songs more than others. I was aware of what was on the radio and what my friends liked, but what I liked were my own. My second gateway in the 70s was this one. Perhaps the rocker vibe was a bit too noisy to be on all the time. Maybe I had to balance the rock with more folksy songs. This next gateway opened me to Neil Young, Jim Croce, James Taylor, CSNY, and other folk artists, as well as the slower songs of the rock bands of that era. Ironically, on the guitar, I learned many more folk songs than rock songs because my first guitar was an acoustic and it remained that way for more than a decade. I also learned how to sing along with my guitar playing, although I didn't consider myself a good singer. But that was the 70s for me, folk and rock. My next gateway into the 80s was this album. The music here was guitar-oriented pop rock that sounded a bit lighter than the bands of the 70s. Second, this album used synthesizers differently, and while 70s heavy rock also used synths, technology had advanced a bit more in this decade that the synth became as essential as the drums and bass. This album was my gateway to New Wave. The Police, The Vapors, The Pretenders, OMD, The Psychedelic Furs, The Fix, and so on. In that same New Wave era, I think that another album, this one, was another gateway. While technically also new wave, this one carried a gloomier vibe in dealing with, well, life. That opened to even more bands in the 80s, like Depeche Mode, New Order, The Cure, The Smiths, Echo and the Bunnymen, and the like. Here was a subgenre that, while using the same instruments, made music that dealt with more serious themes like child abuse, suicide, cancer, religion, politics, and so on, having a bit darker vibe than the other new wave artists. And this is gateway number 3 of the 80s. Not only did this open my mind to punk, but also to ska and reggae. I got the American version of this album, and the one song that just blew me away, and still does even up to now, is White Man in Hammersmith Palais. Upon first listen to this song, my reaction was, what is this? It was so different. A driving riff that cuts out to a reggae beat, then goes back into the riff. This song was so mind-bending for me at the time. Still in the 80s, gateway number 4 was this album. This gateway sent me back through time in the search for rock and roll. This opened me to Elvis, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bill Haley and the Comets, Buddy Holly and the Crickets. But there were also more recent rockabilly artists like Nick Lowe, Dave Edmunds, and the fabulous Thunderbirds. This genre of music is living proof how many songs, bands, and empires have been created by the simple blues progression of 1, 4, and 5. So the 80s for me was new wave, rock and roll, punk, reggae, and ska. But we're not done with the 80s yet. Gateway number 5 in the 80s was this album. This was my gateway for, well, more Steely Dan. Specifically, 5 more albums, and Donald Fagen's Nightfly, and their single FM, No Static at All. I think it is easy to guess what my gateway for the 90s was. Care to guess? What else? This gateway wasn't as mind-blowing as the other gateways. This simply told me that grunge was around and there were similar bands like the Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and so on. This 90s gateway didn't have as much impact as the earlier ones because other things were on my mind during that decade. A job and a family, and the challenges of keeping both afloat. This was pretty much my situation for the next 2 decades. In the mid-90s, I had effectively retired my guitar, except for a few lullabies for the kids, to the tune of Simple Minds or U2. If I had dreams of being a rock star in the 70s, these dreams went to die in the 90s and stayed buried for decades. In those 2 decades, I picked up the guitar only sparingly. An acoustic rendition of Radiohead's Creep during an office Christmas party, and a short jam of Nirvana songs in an empty hotel when there were unused instruments lying around. Likewise, I stopped collecting songs and albums. Money was for diapers, bills, and mortgage, not concept albums. In addition, parts of my supposedly large collection of cassettes and CDs either got stolen or borrowed away, and I lost the desire to rebuild that library. Eventually, I did get to rebuild the library, now as files in a hard disk safe from being stolen. Things changed in late 2016. A college buddy from abroad had emailed that he would be coming over and asked if we could jam for old time's sake. And at about the same time, my youngest daughter wanted to learn how to play the guitar. So I dusted off my token electric guitar. I had bought it in the late 90s, but it just gathered dust around the house. This was just to remind me that I once played the guitar, and while I also had a token amplifier, I never really spent enough time with both the guitar and the amp to improve my playing. These were for display purposes only, but in late 2016, certain upcoming events were pressuring me to pick up the guitar again. I will continue this guitar story in another video, but in preparing for the upcoming events, this led me to my most recent gateway, which, to show how things have changed, is not an album or a band. It's this. This was the paradigm shift, but it didn't feel so jarring because I had exiled myself anyway for almost 3 decades. Everything turned upside down in 2017. After roughly 3 decades of absence from playing the guitar, I decided, just for the heck of it, to focus for the very first time in my life on the electric guitar. So 2017 was the year that I began my sessions with playing the electric guitar almost exclusively at the tender age of 54. Oh well, better late than never. Anywho, as a gateway, YouTube opened my mind to the entire musical universe from just a few minutes ago to way back to the 1930s. Gone were the limitations of airplay and geography. I could access any genre, any artist, and any song on my phone. I could find any version of a song, whether the album original or a live version from when or where, or a cover by another artist. And the discovery of songs branched out in the wildest directions. I could be watching a movie with a song playing, and that would lead me to the soundtrack of the movie, which would lead me to the song and the artist. Or a guitar could be featured by an artist I wasn't familiar with, and I would give the artist a listen, and I would find a song that I liked. Or a YouTuber came up with a song that I found interesting. And the poster child of this gateway was Jimi Hendrix. Yes, I knew of him decades ago, but for some weird reason, what I knew of him was not enough for him to earn a place in my playlist. Ironically, before 2017, I had only one Jimi Hendrix song, and even at that, it was a cover done by Sting with the late Hiram Bullock doing the guitar solo. Today, I have a dozen of his songs in the playlist, and I know how to play 5 of his songs with varying levels of skill. I can't explain to you why I like something at a certain time, but I'm sure my going back to guitars made me appreciate Hendrix a lot more today. With YouTube, I've been venturing into new and strange places and revisiting old haunts that I'd almost forgotten. It's almost overwhelming to soak in the amount of music available to me because of the internet. But the net is a tool, it's always how we make use of it. It's now much easier to access music and how to play it and get inspiration because of the internet. There have been countless times when I'm just lying in my bed, and as I watch videos, I get so inspired that I get off the bed and go down and pick up the guitar. Gone are the days of being dependent on radio for access to music, and for songs to be available at the record stores to have it in my hands, and to depend on songbooks and repeating the song on the tape recorder to learn the licks and the chords. For someone who came from that era, this age of the interweb has been a huge blessing to music as a hobby. Which is, by the way, the message of this video. Never mind my gateways. Because of the internet, it is now much easier to find music, to be inspired by music, and to learn music. With just a few clicks, we can find a song that we like, to find the best version of that song, and to find instructional videos on how to play the guitar or bass or whatever, and to find the lyrics and the chords to that song. For a short list of the most recent artists that I am looking into, I have Slipknot, Ariel Posen, Dion, Covet, Joe Robinson, Billie Eilish, and McBass. If you've noticed, these are artists from different eras, from the earliest to the latest to everything in between, and from different genres, from metal to rock and roll to prog rock to pop and shoegaze. So my story about gateways is simply a statement that today is a great time to be enjoying and learning music. And the very source of time-wasting distractions is also a rich motherlode of music. If we can tear ourselves away from celebrity quarrels and gossip, political poop throwing, and cat and dog and other pet videos, there's a whole universe of music out there just waiting for us. So jack out of everything we think is important on the internet and plug into music to relive a memory, to enjoy a song that we like, or to discover a new one. Or better yet, get into your gateways, either discover a new one or revisit an old one. You're welcome. Thank you for dropping in, and I hope to see you on my next video.